Defusing Flutter Bombs Origins of Flutter Bombs. Flutter Bombs was originally a landscape study using Unreal Development Kit. I had just finished a VR game jam using Arc in 2013 and wanted to better familiarize myself with the engine. Having a background in architecture and an interest in figuring out how to use game engines in the architecture design process, I studied it in the interest of developing a better sense of engine capability, and where the two fields may have some overlap, how the landscape study evolved. The first part of the landscape study was mostly about learning how layer blends worked with landscape materials and terrain sculpting. There was an opportunity to dive into SpeedTree to better understand the import-export process for custom foliage. The study of water surfaces in real time, CG, also became of interest. Last but not least, I also developed a K-formation to catch up with the latest audio unwrapping tools at the time, and also understand how graphics engines handle transitions between interior and exterior environments, bringing the environment to life. To add more life to the environment, I tested different shader effects for water surfaces, dove into Artscape editor Cascade for waterfalls and fire pits, and started working with simple skeletal meshes to create craters for the environment. The first of which was a butterfly. Violence is natural, but it's still insane. In the process of working with the butterfly asset, I looked at a few different ways to add life to this actor. Some methods involved matinee scripting. Other methods looked at paw movement components that could work with the eye controllers. And the last method looked at using physics in conjunction with player-controlled actor testing. This last method, physics, worked really well when testing how to get this delicate butterfly actor to float around the environment in a fun and challenging way. The beginnings of a game was starting to form. In the process of studying the physics system integrated into Arc, I had also come across the existing API for weapons and projectiles that were designed for an Unreal tournament. It was fairly intuitive to integrate a weapon system into the butterfly, which was a bit of a joke at first, but turned into this little game of target practice with a player controlling a butterfly shooting projectiles. The thought had occurred to me that this concept would be really fun to play on console, so I continued to build out the demo environment, complete with Nectar ammo flowers for players to collect so they could shoot Nectar projectiles and drop Nectar bombs. The project was henceforth named Flutter Bombs. The concept of weaponizing a butterfly was fun as a game, but I also saw an opportunity to create something that made a statement about violence. I have been a gamer most of my life, and games are constantly being criticized about their violent content. But I think the theater of the absurd plays a big role here. Juxtaposing protagonists inspired by nature with concepts founded in the advanced weaponry developed by mankind creates a sense of absurdity, and I think lots of games make this point really well. Violence is natural, and part of the natural everyday world. But the tools mankind has developed as part of this whole process are both ostracan and absolutely insane. To quote Sam Cohen, the inventor of the Neutron bomb, Neutron is also one of the characters in Flutter Bombs. It's not about logic, and it's not about rationality. It's not even about sanity. Transitioning from Arc to Unreal Engine 4, sometime in the middle of developing the demo level for Flutter Bombs, Unreal Engine 4 was announced. I was extremely excited to hop into UE4, because it was an opportunity to see how C communicated with the game engine. In Arc, I had learned the Unreal Engine proprietary language UnrealScript, which has a sort of Java-like dot notation, so learning C was pretty challenging. Unifor also had blueprints which was Vito of Kismet from UK, but reached much deeper into the game engine than Kismet. Shortly after Unifor was released, I began porting from UK, which basically meant rebuilding everything from the ground up, but pulling from the same content assets for the most part. Multi-platform. When developing Flutter Bombs, part of the study involved getting an understanding of how the various features of the game would synergize on multiple platforms. So part of building Flutter Bombs also meant exploring multi-platform game design using many of the same mechanical elements. This process involved studying how each platform ergonomically influenced the natural way we interact with the software program, based on intuition associated with software input capability. On console, the 6th degree of freedom physics-based shooter was a comfortable playstyle. For the VR platform, I had developed a variant of the console version, but redesigned specifically based on VR best practices, and on mobile platforms, a twin-stick shooter had emerged. 6th DoF Flying Shooter for PC console. The concept of Flutter Bombs was essentially derived from this variant, bringing a butterfly to life with physics, and then weaponizing it as an act of sensationalism in line with many of its archetypical predecessors, created an interesting style of play. Players had to master the mechanic of getting the butterfly to float in a relatively stable fashion, while engaging air and ground combatants. This was challenging, but the game was designed so ground combatants would be limited in mobility, and bombs would be a close enough shot to their abhorrent nature. Air combatants would engage the player with more dogfight-like routines. Nectar was low to the ground, and players were forced to practically ground themselves to resupply their Nectar ammo. Many parts of the environment were also destructible to achieve that sense of Rampage style of play from back-on-ness. A closer look, 6th DoF Flying Shooter in VR. When attempting to build this game in VR, game design in VR was still very much in the Wild West of development. Developers, including myself, were trying all different kinds of tests to determine ways to create user interfaces in VR, and instigate the game response to input types, like positional head tracking and acceleration. Player movement in Flutter Bombs was originally an oscillating movement to the frequency of player input. So for example, when the player put the right trigger on the gamepad, the butterfly would lift. If the player let go of the trigger, the gravity would take over and the butterfly would float toward the ground again. When the player mastered the controls of the butterfly would practically glide most places with very little oscillation. Outside of VR, this was a fun concept like many physics puzzle games. However, in VR, this control mastery was difficult to achieve, and new players would have been punished by the effects of mentally jarring VR. Players that eventually mastered the flight controls did have noticeably better aim and target practice success in the VR version of the game. It was for that reason we ended up building an on-rails version of the game that progressed slowly through different path environments. For our continued demonstrations at various festivals. Twin-stick shooter on mobile. The concept for the twin-stick shooter was primarily the result of a rough hypothesis along the lines of what happens to a shmup when another plane of combat occurs in world space, rather than parallax space. Most of the shmups I had played in the old arcade days always had an instigate with projectiles at perceived multiple Z spaces, and this made sense for bullet hells. However, I had not really seen too many examples where time was accounted for. when traveling from player flying Z height bound to ground Z height. So, I built a little concept that used the same protagonists as the console and wheel development to create a 3D shmup with two planes of combat interacting. Players would fly their wing set at sky height, fighting off airborne enemies, while wing sets could also drop bombs on spiders below. Festivals. Meetups feedback. Gamescape. It's a part of a festival in Baltimore, MD, United States, called Artscape. Artscape is an enormous festival filled with exhibits, vendors, performers and a massive crowd gathered to celebrate art.